I never thought the day would come when I'd doubt my own best friend, or my wife. But the night before my business trip, something inside me whispered, "Put the cameras up." I didn't know why. I didn't have proof. And when I returned, what I saw in that footage didn't just break me. It destroyed everything I believed in. Daniel Reyes had always been a steady man, a quiet man, the kind of husband people described as dependable, the kind who fixed things before they broke and showed up before he was needed. At 34, he wasn't rich, but he was stable. He worked as a field engineer for a major construction firm, a job that demanded long hours and long stretches away from home. Still, he believed he was building something meaningful, a life for himself and his wife, Sarah. Sarah was softer than he was. She had warmth in her voice, patience in her smile, and a natural way of making people feel understood. As a high school guidance counselor, she spent her days listening to teenagers talk about their fears and their futures. Daniel admired that about her. She saw emotions he often missed. And then there was Ethan, Daniel's closest friend for more than a decade. They'd met in college, survived impossible exams together, shared cheap apartments and late-night ramen. Ethan was charismatic where Daniel was steady, charming where Daniel was quiet. He had an easy laugh and an easier confidence, the sort that made people gravitate toward him. For years, Daniel believed the three of them, himself, Sarah, and Ethan, made a comfortable trio. They celebrated holidays together, went on small weekend trips, even spent evenings on Daniel's porch talking about life as if nothing in the world could shake their bond. But life has a way of cracking long before it breaks. The first crack came quietly. Daniel returned home one evening after a 12-hour shift. He expected the house to smell like dinner, or maybe hear Sarah humming in the kitchen the way she used to. Instead, he stepped inside and found the living room lights low, the television playing softly, and Sarah sitting closer to Ethan than he expected. Not touching, not inappropriate, just close. Close enough to make Daniel pause. Ethan looked up with a bright grin. "Hey, man, we thought you'd be home later." "We?" Daniel repeated, setting his work bag on the floor. Sarah smiled at him, warm, familiar, but tired in a way he couldn't place. "Ethan stopped by to help me move some things in the garage." "That so?" Daniel asked. He wasn't accusing, he was simply surprised. Ethan wasn't usually the type to help with chores without asking first. Ethan nodded eagerly. "Man, Sarah said the shelves were wobbling. I figured I'd lend a hand." It sounded innocent. It looked innocent. So Daniel told himself it must be innocent. But the second crack came 2 days later. He found Sarah sitting on the back steps, staring at her phone with a small, private smile, the kind she used to reserve only for him. When Daniel stepped outside, she quickly locked the screen and forced a cheerful tone. "You're home early," he said slowly. "Everything okay?" "Of course," she answered too quickly. "Just school stuff." He didn't press. He never pressed. The third crack arrived as quietly as the others. Sarah stood at the stove cooking dinner, a rare event lately, when Ethan walked in through the back door as if he lived there. He didn't knock, he didn't call out. He walked straight to the counter, opened the fridge, and grabbed a drink. Daniel watched him, watched Sarah, watched the way her shoulders relaxed when Ethan entered the room. When had that started? He didn't say anything. Mature, older audiences know this kind of quiet denial. Daniel felt it settling into his bones like cold air. That night, while Sarah slept soundly beside him, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something wasn't right. Something subtle. Something he couldn't prove. But a man doesn't need proof to feel his home slipping away. He reminded himself of the life he was trying to build. The long hours, the business trips, the promotions he chased so Sarah could have the comfort she deserved. He wanted to believe he was doing the right things. Yet, in the stillness of the night, Daniel realized something painful. In trying so hard to build a secure future, he had stopped noticing the present. And in that present, someone else, someone he trusted, was stepping into spaces Daniel never imagined sharing. It was a small realization, a quiet one. But it was the beginning of everything. For most of his life, Daniel trusted patterns, morning routines, work schedules, the steady rhythm of responsibility. But lately, the rhythm of his home had shifted. Subtly, quietly, like a song played half a note off-key. Most people wouldn't hear it, but Daniel felt it. And on a Wednesday evening in early October, that feeling sharpened into something colder. Daniel came home later than usual, closer to 9 p.m. The house was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the dining room chandelier. From the doorway, he could see Sarah and Ethan sitting at the table, plates already cleared. They were laughing. Not loud laughter, nothing wild or inappropriate, but a soft, warm laughter that seemed to sit between them like an invisible thread. Sarah looked up first when Daniel stepped in. Her smile wavered. A tiny flicker he might have missed if he hadn't been watching so closely. "Oh, you're home," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I didn't hear you pull in." "I walked," Daniel replied, setting his keys down. "My truck's still at the shop." Ethan leaned back casually in the chair. "Hey, man, we saved you a plate. Sarah made that rosemary chicken you like." Sarah quickly stood to warm the food, but something about her movements felt tense, nervous. She wasn't floating around the kitchen the way she used to. There was a stiffness in her shoulders, a guardedness in her eyes. Daniel noticed, but he didn't ask. After dinner, while Sarah cleaned up, Ethan joined Daniel on the patio. The air was cool and the neighborhood was quiet. "You look tired," Ethan said, sipping from a glass of iced tea. "That business trip next week, you should take it. Might give you a break." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A break?" "Yeah," Ethan chuckled, shrugging. "You've been running yourself ragged. Maybe stepping away for a few days will help you reset." The words sounded harmless, but they landed wrong. Daniel had never asked Ethan for advice about work. He never talked about being exhausted around him. Why would Ethan suggest a trip was good for him? As if Daniel being away would benefit someone else. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He stared out at the yard, at the fence he'd built with his own hands, at the garden he and Sarah planted together years ago. Something in him tightened. Before he could answer, the kitchen window slid open. Sarah leaned out, her voice low and sharp. "Ethan, can you come help me for a second?" Ethan stood quickly. Too quickly. Daniel watched them through the window. They weren't touching, but they were standing closer than friends usually did. Their voices were hushed, their expressions serious. Sarah glanced toward the patio once, her eyes meeting Daniel's through the glass. She looked away just as fast. Another crack. Later that night, Daniel walked into the bedroom to find Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. The screen lit her face in a soft glow, but when she heard him enter, she quickly flipped the screen face down and forced a smile. "You're home early," she said again, the same exact words she had used 2 days ago. "Not really," Daniel answered. "Just didn't stay late today." She nodded, looking down at the phone as if it were a fragile secret in her hands. Daniel changed into sleep clothes and brushed his teeth, all while watching his wife from the corner of his eye. She wasn't acting guilty, not exactly, but she looked unsettled, afraid of something, or someone. When he came back into the bedroom, Sarah slipped under the covers and turned her back to him. Daniel lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Everything felt wrong. Not dramatic, not loud, just wrong. Like the house was holding its breath. The next afternoon, Daniel left work early. He told his boss he wasn't feeling well, a rare move for him. He just needed to see something for himself. When he reached home, he heard voices in the garage. The door was cracked open. He stepped inside quietly. Sarah was there, leaning against the workbench, her arms folded. Ethan stood in front of her, speaking softly. He's not suspicious. He's just tired," Ethan said. Sarah shook her head. "No. He notices things. He always notices things. Relax. Ethan murmured. "Let me handle it." Handle what? Daniel didn't step forward, didn't confront, didn't demand answers. He simply backed away, silent, unnoticed. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs. Whatever was happening, whatever they were whispering about, it involved him, and he had no intention of being left in the dark. That night, Daniel stayed awake long after Sarah fell asleep beside him. Thoughts churned through his mind like a storm he couldn't escape. If he asked her directly, she would deny it. If he confronted Ethan, he would lie. If he accused them without proof, he would look paranoid. Daniel wasn't a man who acted on emotions. He acted on evidence. And he needed evidence now. Clear, undeniable, impossible to spin or twist. That was when the idea came to him. Not from anger, not from revenge, but from the quiet, persistent need to know the truth. Before his business trip next week, he would install cameras. Cameras in places no one would notice. Cameras that would finally show him what had been happening when he wasn't home. He didn't want to catch them. He prayed there was nothing to catch. But deep down, Daniel knew. Whatever he discovered, his life would never be the same again. Daniel waited until Sarah left for work the next morning before he finally opened the small cardboard box he had ordered online 2 days earlier. Inside were 5 tiny wireless cameras, no bigger than the tip of his thumb. They were nearly invisible once mounted, designed to blend into shadows and corners. Exactly what he needed. As he held one in his hand, he felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. This wasn't who he was. He wasn't a man who spied, who suspected, who distrusted. He had built his entire life on honesty and structure. Yet here he was, standing in his own living room with a handful of cameras, preparing to watch the people he loved most. He whispered into the quiet house, "I hope I'm wrong." He started in the living room. He mounted the first camera high on the bookshelf, tucked into the shadow of a decorative vase. It had a perfect view of the entire room. The second went near the kitchen entrance, hidden behind a plant Sarah had bought years ago. The third he placed in the hallway facing the bedroom doors, just enough to see who came and who went. He avoided putting cameras in private areas. Even now, at the edge of suspicion, he respected boundaries. He only needed to know the truth, not invade anything more than necessary. When he tested the feed on his phone, each camera showed a clear, crisp image. Every corner of his home felt suddenly exposed, like the walls were confessing secrets they had kept too long. By the time Sarah came home that evening, the cameras were in place, invisible and silent. She kissed him on the cheek, asked about his day, and moved around the house, without realizing a single thing had changed. Ethan didn't come by that night. In fact, the house was so quiet, so normal, that Daniel wondered if he had imagined everything, but the uneasy feeling inside him didn't go away. When the morning of his business trip arrived, Daniel forced himself to act natural. He kissed Sarah goodbye, picked up his suitcase, and walked out the door as if nothing was wrong. "Call me when you land," she said, smiling softly. "I will," he replied. He didn't ask why she didn't kiss him back. On the plane, Daniel's stomach twisted with guilt. He kept reminding himself that any reasonable husband would want answers if they heard their wife whispering in garages with their best friend. But he also feared what he might find. No matter how strong a man is, some truths break you from the inside out. When he landed in Seattle, he connected to the airport Wi-Fi and opened the camera app. The living room was empty. The kitchen was still. The hallway silent. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Hours passed. He attended his meeting. He checked into his hotel. He ordered dinner he barely touched. Every hour he checked the cameras again. Nothing. At 2:14 p.m., the kitchen camera suddenly lit up. Sarah walked in through the back door. She didn't look like she normally did when she got home. Her hair was freshly brushed, her clothes neatly adjusted, as if she had prepared herself before stepping inside. She glanced around the room, checked her phone, and then did something unusual. She walked to the front door and locked it. Daniel sat forward on the hotel bed, watching the grainy feed with growing tension. A moment later, the back door opened again. Ethan stepped inside. No knock, no announcement. He entered like someone who no longer needed permission. He walked straight to Sarah and hugged her. Longer than friends hug, longer than comfort lasts. Sarah hesitated, then rested her head on his chest. Daniel's heart hammered painfully in his rib cage. His throat closed. His hands shook. Still, he whispered, "Please, don't let it be what it looks like." Sarah pulled away after a moment, wiping her face as if she had been crying earlier. Ethan cupped her cheek gently, and Daniel felt something inside him twist. "You need to relax," Ethan said, his voice low. "He won't know. He's out of town. This is the perfect time." Sarah looked away. I feel guilty." "Guilty for what?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. "For being happy? For not waiting around forever?" "I didn't say that," she whispered. "You didn't have to." Something about the way Ethan spoke, soft, confident, rehearsed, made Daniel realize this wasn't new. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't accidental. This had been happening. Ethan moved to the fridge, grabbed a drink, and sat at the kitchen counter like he owned the place. Sarah leaned against the sink, staring at the floor, wringing her hands. Daniel watched every second with a growing hollow ache in his chest. But the worst came next. At 3:02 p.m., the hallway camera blinked. Motion detected. Sarah walked into the frame first. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't hesitating. She was simply quiet, resigned, like someone walking toward a decision they had already made long ago. Ethan followed her. When Sarah reached the bedroom door, she paused, turned slightly, and whispered something Daniel couldn't hear. Ethan stepped too close. Their faces were inches apart. Then the door opened. They went inside. Together. The door closed behind them. Daniel froze. The camera didn't show what happened inside. It only showed the still, silent hallway, the closed door, and the faint movement of shadows under the crack. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. Each second felt like it scraped against Daniel's chest. When Ethan finally came out at 5:19 p.m., his shirt was wrinkled, his hair messy. He checked his phone, smirked at something, and walked away without looking back. Sarah stepped out 10 minutes later. Her eyes were red. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, leaning against the wall as if her legs could barely hold her. Daniel stared at the screen until the image blurred through the tears he didn't feel falling. He didn't rage. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He simply sat there in the quiet hotel room, phone trembling in his hand, while the truth settled over him like a cold, heavy blanket. His wife, his best friend, his home. All of it. Broken. Yet even through the heartbreak, another thought crept into Daniel's mind. If this had been happening for a while, what else didn't he know? What else had they done? What plans had they made? And most importantly, how long had he been living in a story everyone understood but him? Daniel didn't remember when he stopped watching the camera feed. At some point the screen had gone blurry, not because the image failed, but because his vision did. He sat frozen on the edge of the hotel bed, phone still in his hand, the truth hanging in the air like a weight that refused to drop. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. He could hardly breathe. There was no shouting in the room, no thrown objects, no rage. Only a deep, dull silence that settled into his bones. A kind of silence that didn't explode. It sank. It filled him slowly, spreading through his chest, his throat, the spaces between his ribs, his wife, his best friend, together. In the one room he once felt safest in. Daniel lowered the phone onto the blanket as if it were something fragile. He pressed both hands to his face, but even then he couldn't stop the shaking in his jaw, the trembling in his fingers. There were no tears, not yet, just shock, a numbness that wrapped around him like cold water. After a long time he stood and walked to the small hotel window. The city outside glowed with evening. Lights, soft and indifferent. Cars moved steadily on the wet pavement. People walked the sidewalks with groceries, coffee cups, children tugging at their hands. The world hadn't changed. Only his had. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass. How long had this been happening? The way Sarah had grown quiet. The way Ethan had grown bold. The way both of them had looked at each other when they thought he wasn't watching. All the moments he chalked up to tiredness or stress or harmless friendship suddenly assembled in a new shape. A truth that had been sitting in front of him all along. Daniel whispered into the empty room, "Why didn't you just leave me?" It wasn't anger in his voice. It wasn't even accusation. It was raw, aching sadness from a man who had given everything he knew how to give. He finally lay down on the stiff hotel mattress, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them walking into the bedroom again. The way Sarah hesitated only for a second. The way Ethan followed confidently. The way the door closed. He felt something break inside. Not violently, but quietly, like a thread worn thin over years finally snapping. Sometime in the early morning, exhaustion pulled him under. His sleep was shallow and restless, interrupted by fragments of dreams that left him more drained than before. He woke before sunrise. The room was dim, washed in a faint gray light. His head felt heavy, his chest hollow. For a long moment he simply lay there, letting the quiet press down on him. This was the worst morning of his life. And yet the world outside the window began again as if nothing had happened. Cars starting, a distant siren, footsteps in the hallway. He sat up slowly. His body ached in places he never expected. His shoulders, his back, even his hands. Grief makes its home everywhere. He reached for his phone. The battery was almost dead. He plugged it in, hesitating before opening the camera app again. Part of him didn't want to know more. Part of him needed to. The hallway camera was empty. The living room silent. The kitchen still. He watched for a while, almost afraid of what he might see next. Nothing happened. That emptiness hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. They had gone on with their day, unaware that the truth had already found him. Daniel set the phone down again and buried his face in his hands. He'd spent years working overtime, taking assignments across the country, pushing himself to exhaustion, all to give Sarah a better life, a future, stability, comfort, everything he thought love meant. But last night proved a painful truth. You can build a perfect future for someone and still lose them in the present. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He wasn't angry, not yet. Anger would come later, when the numbness melted. For now, he felt only a profound sadness, the kind that leaves a man feeling older than he is. He finally stood and walked into the small hotel bathroom. He looked at his own reflection in the mirror. His eyes were tired, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He barely recognized himself. "How long have you been blind?" he asked the reflection softly. He splashed cold water on his face and dried it slowly, trying to gather whatever strength he had left. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do next. Call Sarah? Confront Ethan? Fly back home immediately? He didn't want to be impulsive. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want his pain to turn him into someone he wasn't. He needed clarity. He needed proof. He needed to see the full picture. So he sat back on the bed, steadied his breathing, and played the footage again. This time, not as a husband in shock, but as a man trying to understand the depth of what had happened to him. Every frame hurt. Every second felt like a wound reopening. But he watched. When he finally stopped the recording, he felt emptied out, hollow but strangely focused. The truth wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. He'd accept this pain for now. He'd process it, but he wouldn't confront them broken. He wouldn't return home as a man shattered. He would return as someone who understood exactly what had been done to him. The day would come when he stood in front of Sarah and Ethan and looked them in the eye, but it wouldn't be today. For now, he simply closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to himself, "You will get through this, one breath at a time." And for the first time since seeing the footage, he believed it. Just a little. Daniel spent most of the morning sitting in silence, watching the muted hotel television without taking in a single word. The world on the screen looked normal. Cheerful news anchors, weather forecasts, holiday commercials, but it all felt distant, like something happening in another lifetime. He kept glancing at his phone every few minutes, checking the cameras again, almost hoping to see something that would make the night before easier to understand. But the house remained still, quiet, almost peaceful. That was the cruel part. Betrayal didn't leave footprints across the carpet or broken glass on the floor. It left everything looking the same. He finally forced himself to eat the hotel's continental breakfast, a dry muffin and a cup of coffee that tasted burnt, but at least it settled in his stomach. He needed strength, clarity, anything. He took a slow walk outside the hotel afterward. The Seattle air was cool and damp, the sky covered in a blanket of gray clouds. People rushed to work wearing jackets and carrying coffee cups. Their hurried footsteps echoed across the pavement. Daniel watched them, wondering how many of them had ever felt what he felt now. He had always believed that heartbreak came with shouting, slammed doors, dramatic arguments. But instead, it came quietly. It slipped into your life like fog and stayed, touching everything, making even the most ordinary morning feel heavy. He walked for nearly an hour, hands in his pockets, breathing in the cold air. Eventually, he returned to the hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed again. His business meeting had wrapped early, and he was technically supposed to stay another night before flying home. But he couldn't sit in that room any longer. He booked the first available flight back. He didn't tell Sarah. He didn't tell anyone. He simply packed his things. On the plane home, he stared out the window as the clouds drifted below. He replayed conversations in his head, small, forgotten exchanges that suddenly carried new meaning. The way Sarah avoided eye contact sometimes. The way Ethan always seemed to appear at the house, even when he wasn't invited. The conversations that quieted when Daniel walked into the room. He had ignored it because love makes you believe in the best version of the people you care about, even when the truth whispers louder. A flight attendant stopped beside him. "Sir, is everything all right? Can I get you anything?" He forced a small smile. "No, thank you. I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He was unraveling and keeping it together at the same time. When the plane landed, Daniel walked through the airport with steady steps, trying to look like a man on a normal trip home. His suitcase wheels clicked against the floor rhythmically. Every step brought him closer to a confrontation he didn't want but knew was inevitable. His truck was still at the repair shop, so he took a taxi to a rental place and picked up a simple sedan. Nothing fancy, just something to get him home. During the drive, he checked the camera feed every time he hit a red light. Nothing unusual. Sarah was home. Ethan wasn't there. The house looked exactly as it always had. He wondered if she felt anything. Guilt, shame, fear? Or maybe she felt nothing at all. That possibility hurt the most. When he pulled onto his street, Daniel slowed the car to a crawl. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Neatly trimmed lawns, American flags on porches, pumpkins still sitting by doors from the fall season. His house looked exactly the same too. A place he built with years of hard work. A place he trusted. He parked down the block instead of in the driveway. He sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. His heart pounded, not with rage but with a deep, aching sadness. He wasn't ready for shouting or accusations. He wasn't ready to hear excuses he knew would hurt more than silence. He needed to gather himself, show strength, show clarity. Not devastation. So he took a long breath, exhaled slowly, and stepped out of the car. As he approached the house, he saw movement through the living room window. Sarah was walking back and forth, pacing, wringing her hands. She looked nervous, almost panicked. For a brief moment, he wondered if she somehow knew. He opened the front door quietly. Sarah froze when she saw him. "Daniel, you're home early." Her voice shook slightly. "I thought your flight was tomorrow." He set his suitcase down by the wall. The meeting ended early. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Why didn't you call? I would have picked you up." "I didn't want you to," he said softly. Her face flickered with confusion. Then something else. Fear. Daniel walked to the couch, sat down slowly, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Sarah." She hesitated. "You're scaring me." "I don't mean to." His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made her swallow hard and sit down without another word. He waited until she finally looked at him. "When I left for my trip," he began, "something didn't feel right. Something hasn't felt right for a long time." Sarah's eyes darted away. He continued, "So, before I left, I installed cameras." The color drained from her face. Her hands froze on her lap. Daniel didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just spoke quietly, the way someone speaks when the truth hurts too much to say loudly. "I saw you," he whispered. Sarah's breath hitched. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Daniel, please." He held up a hand, stopping her. He couldn't hear excuses yet. Not now. His heart wasn't ready. "I saw everything," he said. "You and Ethan. In the kitchen, in the hallway, in our room." Sarah covered her mouth with both hands as tears fell. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He looked at her, the woman he had loved for nearly 2 decades, the woman he had built his life with. "How long has it been happening?" She broke, completely. I don't know anymore. Months, maybe longer." He closed his eyes for a moment. Months, maybe longer. The truth always hurt worse than guessing. When he opened them again, he saw the guilt on her face, the shame, the fear. But none of those things patched the hole in his chest. "Why?" he asked softly. "I need to hear it. Why him? Why this?" Sarah wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I was lonely. You were gone so often. You were always tired. You never talked to me anymore. Ethan, he was just there. He listened. He made me feel seen." Daniel nodded slowly. It didn't justify anything, but it explained something. He leaned back, feeling the pain settle deep. "And you didn't stop it?" She shook her head, sobbing. "I tried so many times, but he kept coming back, and I kept letting him. I'm ashamed, Daniel. I hate myself for it." He looked at her long and hard. Then he said words that surprised even him. "I'm not here to scream at you." Sarah broke again. "I'm not even here to punish you," he added quietly. "But things can't stay the same. Not after what I saw." She nodded, crying harder. I know. I'll do anything to fix this." Daniel stood slowly. He didn't touch her, didn't comfort her, didn't promise anything. He simply said, "We'll talk, but not today." And with that, he walked out onto the porch and closed the door behind him, leaving her in tears and letting the weight of the truth settle fully between them. He wasn't done. He wasn't healed, but he wasn't broken beyond repair. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Today, he needed air. Daniel walked down the porch steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. The cool afternoon air hit his face, and for a moment he just stood there, letting the breeze steady him. His heart felt bruised, but not shattered, more like something that had been bent too far and was struggling to return to its shape. He walked toward the sidewalk and kept going, not with any destination in mind, but because he couldn't stay in that house. Not yet. Not after seeing the fear on Sarah's face and hearing the words she could barely speak. He needed space. He needed distance. He needed to breathe without feeling the walls close in. He walked the neighborhood slowly, observing things he normally ignored. The old oak trees with their leaves just beginning to fall, the distant sound of a lawnmower, a dog barking somewhere down the street. Life, in all its normalcy, continued around him. No one could see the storm he carried inside. At the corner, he stopped and stared at a bench by the small community park. Children played in the distance, Mothers chatted under the shade of a tree. He sat down, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His thoughts circled in quiet loops, not frantic, just heavy. He knew that what hurt wasn't just the betrayal, it was the familiarity of it. Ethan had been in their home countless times, sitting at that kitchen table, laughing in the living room, sharing meals and jokes and stories. Daniel had trusted him, maybe more than he trusted most people. And Sarah, he didn't know where to put the pain that came from her. It didn't come with anger, it came with grief. He wasn't angry at her tears, or her shame, or even her excuses. He saw a woman who had been lonely and lost and had made choices that destroyed them both. He didn't excuse it, but he understood pieces of it. Understanding didn't lessen the hurt, but it softened the edges. He sat there for almost an hour before he finally stood and walked back toward home. His steps grew slower as he approached his driveway. The house looked quiet, still. Sarah was probably in the living room or the bedroom, crying, waiting, hoping he would walk back in and say something that would undo the last 24 hours. But the truth had already changed everything. When he reached the front door, his phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Hey man, heard you're back early. Everything good?" Daniel stared at the message, stunned for a moment at the audacity. How quickly people lied when they believed their secrets were still intact. He didn't answer. He simply put the phone back in his pocket and walked inside. Sarah was sitting on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with dried tears. She looked up when he entered, but he didn't move closer. He stayed by the door. "I'm going out again," he said quietly. "I need time." She nodded shakily. "I understand." He didn't want to see the hurt in her eyes, not because it wasn't deserved, but because he knew that look. He had seen it on other people in his life. People he had disappointed, people he had loved, people who felt something slipping through their fingers. He stepped back outside, closing the door gently, and sat down on the porch steps. He didn't know how long he sat there. 5 minutes, 20, maybe longer, but at some point he sensed someone approaching. He looked up and saw Ethan walking toward the house. Daniel's breath stilled. Ethan wore the same casual, confident expression he always wore, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. If he was nervous, he hid it well. He walked straight up the driveway, offering a smile that made Daniel's stomach twist. "Man, you scared Sarah half to death showing up early like that," Ethan said lightly. "Everything okay?" Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at him. That alone made Ethan's smile falter slightly. "Daniel," he tried again, chuckling awkwardly. "You're looking at me like I stole your truck." A quiet pause. Daniel's voice, when it finally came, was low and steady. "I saw you." That single sentence carried the weight of everything. It hung in the air, thick and cold. Ethan blinked, confused, or pretending to be. "Saw me what?" Daniel didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "In my house, with my wife." The color drained from Ethan's face so fast it was almost startling. His posture stiffened, his hands falling out of his pockets. He took a small step back. "Daniel, listen, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again, and looked away. "Look, man, Sarah was lonely. You know that. You were never home. You worked all the time. She needed someone." Daniel stood slowly, not threatening, just rising into his full presence. Ethan took another step back. "You were my friend," Daniel said quietly. "You were in my house. You sat at my table. And you did this behind my back." Ethan's jaw tightened. You weren't there for her. Someone had to be. Daniel almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. "You think that makes it better? You think that excuses anything? I didn't plan it," Ethan insisted. "It just happened." "Nothing just happens for months," Daniel said. Ethan looked away again, running a hand through his hair. "She told me. She wasn't happy. She said you didn't talk to her anymore." And instead of telling me, Daniel said, you slept with her. Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time, Daniel saw fear in his eyes. Not of violence. Daniel wasn't that kind of man. It was fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of losing the comfortable lies he had wrapped himself in. Look, I'm sorry, okay? Ethan said softly. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Yes, you did, Daniel replied. And now you're going to stay away. From me. From her. From this house. Permanently. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Something in Daniel's tone, quiet, firm, unshakable, left no room for negotiation. After a long moment, Ethan nodded stiffly. Fine. If that's what you want. Daniel didn't answer. Ethan stepped back again, then turned and walked down the driveway. His shoulders were tense, his steps uneven. He didn't look back. Daniel watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did he sit back down on the porch, the weight of the moment settling around him like heavy air. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't fought, but he had drawn a line, a boundary he never thought he'd need to create. Behind him, through the front door, he heard a quiet sob. Sarah. Inside the house, everything was breaking. Outside on the porch, everything was settling. He didn't know what the future would look like. He didn't know if forgiveness was possible. He didn't know if love could survive something like this. But for the first time since he had seen the footage, he felt something he hadn't felt in days. Control. Not over Sarah. Not over Ethan. But over himself. And that was the beginning of whatever came next. Daniel stayed on the porch long after Ethan disappeared, staring out at the quiet neighborhood. The sky had started to dim, the sun slipping behind the roofs across the street. Porch lights blinked on, one by one. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life continued, unchanged, unaware of the storm that had just been pushed out of the house. But Daniel felt the change deeply. The air around him felt different, still wounded, but clearer, lighter. He had finally confronted the man who betrayed him. He didn't yell. He didn't lose control. He stood his ground as calmly as a man could after having his world pulled apart. For the first time since he saw the footage, he didn't feel helpless. He took a long, steady breath and let it out slowly. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Sarah stepped out, wrapped in a sweater, her eyes still swollen from crying. She hesitated a few feet away, unsure if she was welcome beside him. Daniel didn't look at her right away. He kept his eyes on the sky, the fading light, the quiet street. "Did Ethan come by?" she finally asked, her voice fragile. "Yes," she swallowed. "Did you talk to him?" Daniel nodded once. "I told him to stay away, from both of us." A shaky breath left her lips. "Thank you." He turned his head slightly, surprised by the response. "You're thanking me." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I don't want to see him again. I should have ended it long before. All of this." Daniel studied her for a moment, not responding. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. Like a part of her had collapsed under the weight of her own actions. She stepped closer, but didn't sit. "I know you don't want to hear much from me right now, and I don't blame you, but I want you to know, I'm done with him. Completely." Daniel looked out at the street again. It should have been done before it started. Her breath broke into a quiet sob. "I know." Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Sarah whispered, "Do you want me to leave the house?" Daniel didn't answer right away. That question hit harder than he expected. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, to push the pain out of the house and breathe. Another part of him felt the weight of 17 years together, the memories, the commitment, the pieces of life intertwined in every drawer and every room. After a long pause, he said, "Not today." Sarah nodded. He added, "But things can't stay as they are." "I understand." They stayed outside for a few minutes, neither knowing what to say. When the cold started to sink in, Sarah whispered, "I'll give you space." She slipped back inside, closing the door gently behind her. Daniel didn't follow. He remained on the steps a long time, letting the night settle in and the quiet wash over him. He felt drained, like a man who had finally stopped fighting the current and was letting himself float, even if the water was cold. Eventually, he stood and went inside. The house felt unfamiliar, like he was walking into a place rebuilt while he wasn't looking. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at the floor. When she heard him, she straightened a little. "I'll sleep in the guest room," she said quickly before he could speak. "You don't have to ask." Daniel nodded. He didn't have the energy for another conversation. He went to the master bedroom and closed the door behind him. For a few moments he just stood there in the dark, listening to the house breathe. The creaks in the walls, the faint hum of the fridge, the distant sound of a car passing outside. He walked to the bed and sat down slowly. The sheets felt cold. He stared at the wall in front of him, the outlines of familiar pictures just visible in the dim light. This was the room where he had shared years of life with her. Quiet mornings, late-night talks, arguments, laughter, plans, all of it now shadowed by what he saw on the camera. He pressed his palms into his eyes. He didn't cry, not tonight. The tears had dried somewhere between the hotel room and the porch. What remained wasn't despair. It was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones after carrying a heavy truth too long. Later, when he finally lay down, sleep didn't come quickly. His mind replayed everything: Sarah's trembling voice, Ethan's excuses, the way the house felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. The memories looped until dawn. He woke early the next morning, his throat dry, his body heavy. For a few seconds he forgot where he was or what had happened. Then the memories rushed back in. He sat up, breathing deeply. Today wasn't about anger or revenge or forgiveness. Today was about clarity. He showered, dressed, and made coffee. When he entered the kitchen, Sarah was already there, standing by the sink, her hair tied back, eyes puffy. She didn't look at him. She didn't speak. He poured his coffee and stood there for a moment. "I'm going to take a drive," he said. She nodded. "Okay." He paused. "Don't call Ethan." Her shoulders tensed. "I won't. I promise." He studied her for a moment, trying to discern truth in her expression. She looked broken, not manipulative, not defensive, just broken. He walked out the front door and drove, aimlessly at first. Then he found himself outside a quiet lake on the edge of town. He parked and stepped out, watching the morning sun touch the water. He didn't think about Sarah. He didn't think about Ethan. He thought about himself, the man he had become, the man he wanted to be. He realized something he had never admitted aloud. Somewhere along the way, he stopped living for himself. He lived for work, for responsibility, for being dependable, for being steady. But he hadn't lived for happiness. Not in years. He sat on a picnic table by the water, rubbing his hands together. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine and wet earth. A peaceful place, untouched by betrayal. A phone buzzed in his pocket. It wasn't Sarah. It was his coworker checking in on the trip. Daniel didn't respond. Not yet. For the first time in a very long time, he needed to make decisions for himself, not for work, not for marriage, not for anyone else. He stayed at the lake for hours, letting the water calm him, letting the quiet settle something inside him. And slowly, he realized something important. He wasn't staying in the marriage because he still believed in it. He was staying because he didn't know who he was without it. That frightened him. But it also opened something new inside him. Room to breathe, room to think, room to grow. When he finally drove home, he had made no final decisions, but he carried something he hadn't felt in days. A beginning, a direction, a quiet strength. When he walked inside, Sarah looked at him with hopeful, frightened eyes. Daniel didn't say anything yet. Not forgiveness, not separation, not reconciliation. Just one simple truth. We have a lot to talk about. And for once, he felt ready. Daniel closed the front door behind him and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the house settle around him. The afternoon light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a muted glow across the living room. He could hear Sarah moving in the kitchen, soft footsteps, the clink of a cup, the sound of someone trying to look busy when they were anything but. He stepped into the room, and she looked up immediately. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face pale, her shoulders tense. It was clear she had spent the entire day waiting for him to come back, waiting for whatever came next. He didn't sit. Not yet. He stood near the doorway, taking in the woman he had shared a life with for 17 years. She seemed smaller somehow, not in stature, but in spirit, like the weight of the last few days had folded her inward. She set the cup down carefully, as if afraid any sudden move might shatter whatever thin layer of peace existed between them. "Can we talk now?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded and moved toward the table. They sat across from each other, close enough to hear every breath, far enough that neither one reached out. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I need to understand. Not the excuses. Not what happened. I know what happened. I need to understand why." Sarah looked down at her hands, twisting them together. "I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense. Try." She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "You know, for years, I thought I could handle the distance. Your work, the long hours, the trips. I told myself it was just a phase, that one day you'd slow down and be home more, but you didn't. And I didn't want to complain because I didn't want to be the reason you held back in your career." Daniel listened without interrupting. He didn't fold his arms or narrow his eyes. He just listened, something he realized he hadn't done enough of. "I would sit here," she continued, gesturing weakly around the house, "and wait for you to walk through the door. Some nights you didn't come home until after I'd gone to bed. Some weeks you barely spoke unless I asked a question. I was trying to provide for us," Daniel said quietly. "I know that," she whispered, "and I appreciated it. Truly. But I didn't feel like your partner anymore. I felt like the person who lived in your house while you lived in your job." Daniel's stomach sank. He didn't argue. He knew she wasn't wrong. "But none of that excuses what I did," she added quickly, voice trembling. "I want you to know that. I crossed a line I never should have crossed." Daniel leaned back slightly, letting the words touch him, letting them settle without pushing them away. "Why Ethan?" he asked. "Why him of all people?" Her eyes closed as if the question itself caused pain. "Because he was here. Because he listened. Because I didn't realize how vulnerable I was until it was too late." Daniel watched her carefully. "Did you love him?" "No," she said immediately. "No. I don't think I ever did. I think I loved the attention. I loved having someone look at me like I mattered. I loved feeling wanted." Daniel's jaw tightened. Not in anger, but in sadness. "So, you didn't feel wanted here?" Her voice broke. "Daniel, you barely touched me anymore. You barely talked to me unless I talked first. I felt like I was disappearing in front of you." He rubbed his forehead slowly, taking that in. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth he couldn't deny. Sarah leaned forward, tears forming again. "But I should have talked to you about it. I should have told you how lonely I was. Instead, I let someone else fill the space between us. That's on me." Daniel's voice was steady, but low. "Why didn't you stop it after the first time?" She swallowed hard. "Because I was ashamed. And once it happened, I didn't know how to undo it without telling you everything. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to face you. I kept telling myself I would end it. And every time I tried, he pulled me back in. He knew exactly what to say." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. "He took advantage of the cracks." "Yes," she whispered, "and I let him. I let it happen. I own that. I betrayed you. I betrayed our home." He looked at her for a long moment, letting silence speak. She waited, barely breathing. Finally, Daniel said, I'm not asking all this to hurt you. I'm trying to decide if there's anything left to save." Sarah nodded slowly, tears falling. "I understand. But I need to know one more thing," he added. "Has it happened recently? Since I confronted you? Since I came home?" "No," she said firmly. "No. I haven't seen him. I haven't called him. I haven't answered him. I deleted everything. I swear it, Daniel." He studied her face, her posture, her trembling hands. And he believed her. Not because he wanted to, but because there was no lie in her eyes. He exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. "Things can't go back to how they were," Daniel said. "Too much has happened." "I know," she whispered, "but I'm not ready to decide anything yet." "Take all the time you need," she said quickly. "I won't push. I won't ask. I'll respect whatever you choose." Daniel looked around the house, the photos on the walls, the furniture they picked out together, the memories woven into every corner. A part of him still felt connected to all of it. Another part felt like a stranger in his own home. After a long pause, he said quietly, "I need honesty from now on. Complete honesty. No hiding, no whispers, no secrets." Sarah nodded, wiping tears. "You'll have it. I promise. And I need space. I'm not ready to share a room. I'm not ready to pretend this didn't happen. I'll stay in the guest room for as long as you need," she said, "even if it's forever." Daniel didn't respond to that. The word forever felt too heavy to touch. She looked at him with eyes filled with regret, guilt, and something else. Hope, faint and fragile. "Daniel, can you ever forgive me?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because forgiveness wasn't a decision. It was a journey, one he wasn't sure he was ready to start. Instead, he said softly, "Time will tell." Sarah closed her eyes and nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Daniel stood slowly, feeling the weight in his chest shift. Not lighter yet, but more defined, easier to carry. "We'll talk more tomorrow," he said. She nodded again. As he walked toward the bedroom, he heard her whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on me yet." He paused at the hallway but didn't turn around. "Good night, Sarah." He closed the door gently behind him. And for the first time since everything began, he felt something new. Not peace, not healing, but possibility. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, Daniel woke before the sun had fully risen. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after a storm but before the air decides what it wants to become. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to his own breath. It was the first morning in days where his chest didn't feel like it was being crushed. But it wasn't peace he felt. It was resolve. He got out of bed, showered, dressed, and moved through the house with a calmness that surprised even him. In the kitchen, he found that Sarah had already made coffee. She hadn't touched her cup. It sat on the table, untouched, cooling. She was standing by the stove with her arms folded, looking like she'd been waiting for him. He didn't say good morning, not because he didn't want to, but because the word felt too soft for where they were now. She spoke quietly. "I made you coffee." "Thank you," he said, taking a cup and sitting at the table. She hovered in the doorway, unsure if she should sit or leave. He gestured lightly to the chair across from him. She sat slowly, hands folded in her lap. She looked as if she hadn't slept at all. Daniel took a sip of the coffee, and for a moment they both stared at the steam rising between them. He finally said, "I'm taking some time off work, a few weeks." Her eyes widened just a little. "You never take time off." "I know," he said, "but I need it." She nodded, but the fear in her expression deepened. "Is that because of us?" "It's because of everything," he replied softly. "I need to think. I need to figure out what I want without work pulling at me." She swallowed hard. "Of course." Daniel finished his coffee and stood. "I'm going to the gym this morning. Then I'm meeting a friend for lunch." Sarah looked surprised. "You're meeting someone?" "An old co-worker," he said. He moved back into town. I haven't seen him in years." "Oh," she said, her voice soft and small. "That's good." He nodded. "I need to reconnect with people. With myself." Sarah lowered her head, brushing away a tear she tried to hide. "I understand." Daniel grabbed his keys and jacket and headed to the door. He paused before leaving. "If you need anything," he said calmly, "text me." "I won't bother you," she whispered. He didn't correct her. He didn't know if he wanted her to or not. Outside, the morning air felt fresh, crisp, almost cleansing. For weeks he had been drowning in doubt, anger, sadness. But now, as he stepped into the world, it felt like he was finally beginning to breathe again. He drove to the gym, something he hadn't done in months. The familiar smell of rubber mats and weight bars hit him as he walked inside. He lifted slower than he used to, but every movement felt purposeful. Sweat dripped down his face, his muscles burned, and with each rep, he felt a piece of himself returning. Strength, stability, identity. When he finished, he walked to the locker room and stared at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time, he didn't see a broken man. He saw someone rebuilding, someone choosing himself. He showered, changed, and drove to meet his old coworker, Tom, for lunch. Tom was loud, friendly, full of stories about the past and complaints about his knees. They laughed more than Daniel expected. It felt good, normal, stepping into a part of his life that had been gathering dust. During lunch, Tom asked casually, "So how's Sarah doing? You two still good?" Daniel paused. The question hit harder than expected. "We're working through some things," he said. Tom nodded knowingly. "Well, marriage has its chapters, man. Some good, some awful. But you always seemed like a steady one. You'll get through whatever it is." Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't sure if getting through meant staying or leaving. After lunch, he drove without a destination again. The sky was pale blue, quiet, and he let the drive settle his mind. Hours passed without him noticing. When he finally headed home, the afternoon sun had already started to dip. He parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, gathering himself. He wasn't ready for another emotional conversation. He wasn't ready for tears or apologies or memories, but he couldn't hide in the car forever. Inside, he found the house clean. Too clean. Sarah had clearly spent the entire day scrubbing surfaces that didn't need scrubbing. She stood in the living room, wringing her hands. "How was your day?" she asked timidly. "Good," he said honestly. "Productive. That's nice." He noticed that she was wearing an old sweater of hers, one she hasn't worn in years. Something comfortable, familiar, humble. She had washed her face, tied her hair back. She looked like the woman he married, not the woman who drifted away from him. They stood there, awkwardly, in the space between them. Finally, Daniel said, "I've been thinking about us, about what you said yesterday, about the distance, about how we both let things fall apart." She looked up with cautious hope. He exhaled slowly. "I'm not making a decision today. Probably not tomorrow either. But I'm not ready to walk away yet." Her breath cracked. You're not?" "Not yet," he repeated, "but things have to change. Both of us. Not just you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'll do anything, Daniel. I'll go to counseling. I'll give you space. I'll stop working late. I'll delete my social accounts. Anything. It's not about fixing things overnight," he said gently. "It's about rebuilding slowly. Carefully, if that's even possible." She nodded, tears streaming silently. "I'm willing to do the work." "We'll see," he said. She wiped her cheeks. "What do you need from me right now?" Daniel thought for a moment, then answered simply. "Consistency, honesty, patience." "I can do that," she whispered. He believed she wanted to. Whether she could was something only time would show. Later that evening, Daniel sat on the couch reading, something he hadn't done in months. Sarah stayed in the guest room giving him space. The house was quiet, not a tense quiet, but a reflective one. He realized something quietly profound. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was rebuilding, piece by piece, not for the marriage, not for Sarah, but for himself, and maybe, if the foundation ever grew strong again, then for both of them. When he finally went to bed, he didn't feel lost. He didn't feel broken. He felt steady, a man facing forward, a man choosing his next step slowly, carefully, a man who had survived the worst night of his life and was still standing. Tomorrow would bring another decision, and the day after that. But for now, he let himself sleep. Not as a betrayed husband, but as a man reclaiming his life. 2 weeks passed, and the days settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. Quiet, thoughtful, careful. Daniel woke early each morning, went to the gym, read books he'd forgotten he owned, spent afternoons walking along the river trail, and most evenings sitting alone in the living room with a cup of tea cooling beside him. He wasn't avoiding Sarah anymore. He simply wasn't rushing toward her either. She respected the space he asked for. She didn't cling, didn't beg, didn't overwhelm him with apologies. Instead, she moved quietly through the house like someone trying not to disturb a museum. She cooked simple meals, left them on the counter, then retreated to the guest room. Some nights Daniel ate her food. Some nights he didn't. She never asked which. One evening he came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of printed papers in front of her. She looked up when he entered, nervous but composed. "I went to the therapist," she said softly. Daniel set his keys down. "How was it?" "Hard," she admitted. "Harder than I expected, but good. The therapist told me something I didn't want to hear, but needed to hear." He didn't sit, but he waited. "She said I wasn't just lonely. I was disconnected from myself, that I built a life that looked busy on the outside so I didn't have to face the emptiness inside." She took a breath. She said the loneliness began long before the marriage began to break. Daniel nodded slowly. "That sounds honest." "It was," she whispered. "Painfully honest." He joined her at the table. She slid the papers toward him. "I've been writing," she said. "Not to you, about me, about everything I didn't understand until now." She hesitated. "You don't have to read these. I just wanted you to know I'm doing the work." Daniel tapped the pages lightly with his fingertips but didn't open them. "I'm glad." She studied his face, looking for something. Hope, maybe. Permission. A sign of direction. But he didn't give it freely. His heart wasn't ready. Not yet. Later that night, he stood outside on the back porch watching the moon through thin branches swaying in the breeze. He heard the sliding door open behind him and footsteps approach, slow and cautious. Sarah stood a few feet away. "Can I sit?" He nodded. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the soft hum of the night. Finally, she said, not looking at him, "Are you leaning toward staying or leaning toward leaving?" Daniel exhaled. The question landed gently but heavily. "I'm leaning toward clarity," he said. She almost smiled. "I don't know what that means." "It means," he said quietly, "I won't decide based on fear, or guilt, or comfort. I'm going to decide based on whether I can look at you in 5 years and not feel the weight of this moment pressing on my chest." She swallowed hard. "And can you?" "I don't know yet," he answered honestly. "But I'm closer to knowing." The next day, Daniel drove to the lake just outside town, a place he hadn't visited since he and Sarah were newly married. They used to sit on the hood of the car, sharing a thermos of coffee and talking about their plans. He parked in the same old spot and stepped out into the crisp air. The water shimmered like a sheet of glass. He stood there for almost an hour, hands in his pockets, watching the slow ripples near the shore. He finally whispered, "What do I want?" The answer didn't come as a flash. It came gradually, gently, like the lake revealing its depth inch by inch. He wanted peace. He wanted honesty. He wanted presence. He wanted trust that didn't require monitoring cameras, recordings, or second-guessing every expression on someone's face. He wanted simplicity, warmth, steadiness, not constant fear of losing someone who wasn't fully there. By the time he got back in the car, he knew. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't broken. He wasn't stuck. He was ready. When he returned home, Sarah was in the living room, folding laundry. She looked up, startled by the resolve in his expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. She set the clothes aside immediately. He sat across from her, calm, steady, collected. "I've made a decision," he said. Her hands shook as she folded them together. He took a deep breath. "I'm not choosing divorce out of anger, and I'm not choosing reconciliation out of habit. I'm choosing a path that gives both of us the life we can actually live. Not the one we're trying to resurrect." She blinked, her chest rising slowly. "Daniel, whatever you choose, I'll accept." He nodded. "I know." He looked into her eyes, not searching for guilt or sorrow or apology, but simply seeing her as she was. A flawed woman, a lonely woman, a woman who made mistakes in the dark parts of her life when he wasn't present, a woman who broke him, and a woman who, in her own way, was trying to piece herself back together too. "I think we need to separate," he said softly, not out of punishment, but out of truth. Her breath trembled. Tears filled her eyes instantly but didn't fall, as if she was trying to honor the moment by staying strong. "Is it final?" she whispered. "No," he said, "but it's necessary. For both of us. I need space to rebuild myself fully, and you need space to rebuild your life without me being the reason or the anchor or the expectation." She closed her eyes, letting the words settle. "I understand," she whispered. "It hurts, but I understand." Daniel continued, his voice gentle but firm. "We can revisit the marriage later, months from now, not from a place of trauma, but from clarity. If we still fit each other, we'll know, and if we don't, we'll part peacefully." Her tears finally spilled over. "Do you still love me?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I love what we were," he said softly. "I don't know if I still love what we became." She covered her mouth, stifling a quiet sob. "That's fair." He reached out and handed her a tissue. She took it with shaking fingers. "I'm not abandoning you," he said. "I'm choosing healing. For both of us." The next few days unfolded gently. They spoke honestly, divided responsibilities, made temporary living arrangements. There were no screaming arguments, no slammed doors, no bitter accusations, just two people acknowledging that something precious had cracked long before it shattered. On the morning Daniel packed a small suitcase and prepared to leave for a few months, Sarah stood in the doorway, tearful but composed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not hating me." He stopped, looked at her for a long moment, and replied softly, "Hate is heavy. I'm done carrying heavy things." She nodded, letting the tears fall. "Freely now." "Do you think we'll find our way back?" Daniel placed a gentle hand on the doorframe. "If we're meant to," he said, "we won't have to force it." He stepped outside, pulled the door gently closed, and breathed in the cool morning air. For the first time in a long time, he felt light. Not because he'd lost something, but because he'd reclaimed himself. He walked to the car with steady steps, started the engine, and drove toward a life he hadn't planned but was finally ready to meet. Behind him, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Quiet, familiar, full of memories and mistakes, love and loss. Ahead of him, the road stretched open and unburdened. For the first time, Daniel wasn't running away from something. He wasn't running toward something either. He was simply moving forward, and that, he realized, was its own kind of healing, its own kind of hope, its own kind of beginning.